So it's my pleasure to introduce to you Amanda Thomas. Amanda was in cohort number 1. Cohort number 1. Ooh, no.
You call that reverend.
I think we do call that reverend. She was willing to go on this brand new venture at the time and see what might become of it, but has since then certainly helped to contribute to not only people at her institution, which is Loyola University, Maryland, where she's been, all told, about 25 years or so. Professor of psychology, and is now the interim vice president for academic affairs. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's correct. Clinical psychology. Okay. Amanda and I were on the institutional examine team for St. Peter's recently, so I had a chance to work with Amanda, and it's just a joy to spend some time with her and to work on such a wonderful project as visiting the school and seeing all the great work that St. Peter's is doing. But we have this wonderful way of noticing the differences. You know, when you work intensely with someone for a couple of days trying to crank out a report, you kind of notice different work styles. And, you know, being the philosophy theology major person that I am, you know, I kind of look at the institution from the, 50,000 feet. Yeah, they're doing pretty good. Got some good stuff going on there. And if I was going to, Amanda got to be the chair of that committee. And luckily, because if I had to write it, it'd be like 2 sentences. Yeah, you guys are doing really great. Keep up the good work. You're done, right? And Amanda's taking, tedious notes, asking really detailed questions and things like that. And so we came to the point where we're writing the report, and at one point I just realized, the biggest gift I could be was just to type. I contributed my part, I was okay with that, but there's 7, 8 sections, whatever. And while I'm just typing, and people were rattling stuff off, and there's a big screen here, and there's down here, and we're working, and there came one point where Amanda was talking, and I'm just stopped, and she's like, Joe, is there something wrong? No. She's like, then why aren't you typing? Because I can't read what your mind is thinking unless you tell me what's going on there. Right? So it was that wonderful moment when you realize your colleagues are almost completely in sync, right? Not quite. You can't quite, read someone's mind exactly. So, but it was really an enjoyable time to do it. And I think what I appreciate is Amanda's willingness to, she had contacted me to want to connect again with ICP and to be a part of it, not just as a presenter, but also maybe a participant at some point in some of the pieces of it, retreat or whatever it might be. Her desire to be a part of the mission and to live that mission in her daily work is inspiring, not only the folks at Loyola in Baltimore, but the folks like me who see these folks go through and become our institutional leaders, and then their generosity and goodness of spirit, as well as their expertise, all come together in ways that help us think more deeply about, so what is mission, not only institutionally, but what's it mean for me and how do I contribute to that? And so I'm really grateful that Amanda was willing to come and share some thoughts of what it's been like for her as an alumni and where she's now. So, Amanda.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, my first job is to welcome you. On behalf of, you hear that you're going to top the 500 mark of ICP, but there are over 400 alumni in ICP because cohort 10 is still working and you all are just starting. This is a group of us on the Magis retreat years ago. And then this is a picture of some of my favorite colleagues when we were at the Casa in El Salvador. And so Brian Williams from John Carroll and Rich Rushello from LMU and Mark Reed, who was at Fairfield and is now at St. Joseph's, and then Peg McCarthy from Canisius. So all divisions, all universities, we're all in this together. And on behalf of all of them, it's my great honor to welcome you. So one of the best advantages of being in Ignatian Colleagues is the colleague part. And I think many of you in the small group that I was talking with, you could see that just even tonight, as you start to meet people, you can see that these are folks that you can call and ask questions about your work, but more importantly, you can ask questions about your life, you can ask questions about the mission of the university, and as time goes on during your 18 months, I think you'll get closer and closer to the colleagues in your small group, but other colleagues as well. Really big bonding experiences, the retreat, but most especially the immersion trip. So some of you may have heard that from other folks. I was married for, I guess it was cohort 9, and I was reminded how sad it is to finish. Folks were sad to be done, and were really enjoying their time. So I hope, it may not seem like that this evening, but I hope that is how it comes for you. So how does all this happen? So in my case, it really didn't start out that well. So this is me at various points in my Ignatian colleagues' experience, and obviously this is a takeoff from the great painting by Munch, The Scream. And I love this painting so much that I have a scarf with it on it, and if I have a really difficult meeting, I have my scarf on, and folks who work with me go, oh Lord, she's got the scarf on, what's gonna happen? So I know some of you may have gotten up this morning and said, gee, I just can't wait to fly to Chicago, have my flight get canceled, try to get here from St. Louis and sit in traffic for 3 hours in one case, and then go out, not really in Chicago, but in the middle of nowhere and sit around with 59 people that I've never met. This is what I can't wait to do. Some of you are so extroverted, you really are like, yes, this is what I want to do. But for many people, orientation is a little challenging. And my own orientation, the first cohort started in January. So for whatever reason, we started at the White House, which is a retreat center in St. Louis, also out from St. Louis, but over the Mississippi River. So I had this, vision of the Mississippi, the mighty Mississippi. It'll be beautiful. It was freezing. I wore 3 shirts during most of the time. There was something going on with a lot of wind coming through the windows. They had family-style eating, and I would sit there and I could see the guys around me were hungry, so I'd stop eating as much and putting as much, and so that got weird. There were all these deep theological lectures, including the first night, and I was like, I need to read more or do something. I can't even follow all of this. And then, a friend of mine who had been at Loyola and was then at Fordham had this long conversation. It wasn't really a conversation. I was listening to him. Because he was doing all the talking, which was fine, but it was all about the 3rd week, and he'd been living in the 3rd week, and it was so awful to be in the 3rd week, and I was like, what is he talking about? So orientation was a little challenging, and I was just like, what am I doing? So this is also a picture of me when I was packing to go on the retreat. So I'm packing to go on the Magis retreat, and I'm on the extroverted side. I talk too much. I'm fidgety. I run 100 miles an hour. If I could do 3 things at once, I do. And I'm like, oh my goodness, what am I doing? I said to my husband, why do I sign up for things I don't really want to do? So flew to actually to Denver and stayed at Regis for a night. And I just had lunch with Stephanie and a great colleague from Loyola Press, Terry Locke. And I didn't know Terry before the retreat, and she and I were on the shuttle, and she's so happy. And I said, she goes, Amanda, what's up? And I'm like, oh, I don't know about retreats, quiet. I don't, She goes, it's going to be great. It's a vacation with God. You're going to love it. And I thought, God, she's crazy. So I'll just say 1 hour in, I was totally converted. But that's how I looked before I went. And this is also a picture of me packing to go to El Salvador. I was not looking forward to having my heart broken and being ruined for life. That sounded extremely difficult. It also happened to be right before a snowstorm of the century hit Baltimore. We can't handle snow in Baltimore. I know many of you can, but over 2 inches and people start completely freaking out. We close school, on and on. So 33 inches in a week. And I was at Dulles, and they said, we're going to leave an hour early and we're closing the airport. So that's the kind of scene. And they had an 11-year-old and a 14-year-old. I'm thinking, my husband travels a lot, but there is no way I'm going to owe him for life if he was home for a whole week. No, nothing. So, and then I'm thinking I don't speak Spanish, and what am I doing? So, how did I get past my scream points? I started learning from the great St. Ignatius. So, one of my biggest lessons, I'll talk about my lessons of Ignatian colleagues, is discernment. And I know that you're going to hear a lot about discernment over your time here. And there's a lot to say about what I've learned about Christian decision making. And I will say that you can read it and think you have it, and then be in the middle of decision making and be like, oh, that's what that is. Oh, that's what I need to be doing. So it's taken me a long time to understand the concept of indifference. And those of you who have done some reading in Ignatian spirituality, you know indifference does not mean you don't care, but it means that you can get yourself to a place free of bias. It's very hard. You have to know yourself very well. You have to take feedback from outside that you may or may not like hearing about yourself to get to that point of indifference. And it's, in my case, easy to lose it. So indifference is one thing I've learned about with regard to discernment. I'm a psychologist. You'd think I'd be a touchy-feely sort of person, but I'm really a data kind of person. I like studies showing what's important. I like thinking, not feeling so much. But in true discernment, you have to pay attention to both. So very important. I was talking to Stephanie today about a discernment I've been in the past few weeks, and I've been looking for external confirmation that I've made a good decision. It's been hard for me to find. So that's just another step that St. Ignatius talks about. I've been slow for as old as I am to see that there is no perfect decision, and that circumstances change, and because you've made a decision doesn't mean that you may not have to go back and do it again. But I've been very consoled, and Joe's going to talk more about consolation and desolation later in the week, through my time in Ignatian colleagues, and since then, that God is with me in my decision making. And I may not always feel it or see it, but I do know it. And so in the end, things will be all right. All of these things about decision making and discernment are with you whether you recognize it or not. So that's been another lesson for me, to realize that you may not always notice everything, or you may not always be aware, but they're still there with you. So just to give you an example, when I was asked, you were all talking about your choice to become an Ignatian colleague, and I've heard a lot of interesting stories, like my president made me do it. I've been waiting for years for this opportunity. One person asked me, I want to do it, Amanda, but I've heard it's as much work as a graduate degree. No, not that. But when I was thinking about, and obviously I was in cohort 1, so there was no one to ask, right? There was no, and I don't come from Heartland Delta, where the whole thing had been conceived, so I didn't have these like founders around me like Stephanie and Ed Peck, etc. So, but I was just asked by the Dean of Arts and Sciences if I would consider. He said, I think you'd really enjoy it. I think it'd be really good for you and for the institution. And I made my list like any decision maker. You know, here's why I should do it. Here's why I shouldn't do it. Here's how much time I have. Here's how much time it takes. So I did all that, and it wasn't really computing for me to do Ignatian colleagues, but I just felt a pull to do it. And so, you know, now I would say I felt a call to do it. And, you know, I really didn't know much about discernment. I really didn't know a great deal about Christian decision making, but it was a great discernment for me. It was one of my best decisions. So I got away from all the thinking and also put some feelings in. Another great lesson I've learned from Ignatian colleagues is paying attention. And I know that you all have been reading and listening to Father Gray talk about the importance of paying attention. And it's true that paying attention involves the senses, such as the eyes, but the brain has to be engaged as well, right? You have to You have to have enough space to really think and feel the things that you're seeing and hearing. As I became more and more aware of the importance of attention and tried to focus my attention, there were so many things at my home institution that I started to notice. I noticed people from a variety of areas of the institution, and I noticed how their work was progressing, what was in the way of them doing their work, and how their personal lives were affecting their ability to do their work. I became more and more aware of policies at my institution, how those policies were derived, how many of them simply had been there forever, and whether or not they really enliven the mission of Loyola or not. I became more and more aware of our curriculum. I'm an academic, I think about curriculum. Sometimes I prefer not to think about curriculum, but how important it is in the lives of our faculty, in the lives of our students. And so I think as time went on, I just became more and more prayerful that God would open my eyes and my sensitivities to things. And so there are so many experiences in Ignatian colleagues that open your sensitivities and help you to understand that you are in solidarity with the rest of the human race. And this is a picture in downtown San Salvador. El Salvador is a wonderful country with wonderful people, with a history of violence and poverty that most of us cannot possibly understand. And so to see where people were living in, and you really can't even go in this, in warehouses, and to see what was available for them to buy, to eat. And although you cannot see it here, to see the guns that are everywhere to protect was just life-changing for me. Even more life-changing is to go to the UCA in San Salvador, where 4 Jesuit priests, including the president of the university, were yanked out of bed and killed in this rose garden, along with their housekeeper and the housekeeper's 16-year-old daughter. It's impossible to stand in this rose garden and not feel the unbelievable injustice and violence that people then there, people now there, and people in many parts of this world that we are a part of experience every day. So many of us, I've got one more, and this for me was the most moving piece. And some of you know your Spanish, and it's hard to see with the light off of it. But this is the altar where Archbishop Romero was shot and killed while he was saying Mass. And it says, this altar for Archbishop Romero offering his life to God for his people. So you come home from an experience like this, and it's just not the same. Your life is just not the same. And like many Ignatian colleagues, you feel you must do something. Now, not all do. Some pray, some think, but as I've already described myself, I am a doer. And so for me, I came home and I said, I have to know more about God. I have to understand more about someone like Oscar Romero, what he would put his life on the line for. I just need to do it. And I started taking graduate theology courses. I didn't exactly have more time when I got back from El Salvador, but I just felt it was really important. I became more and more involved in my own church, and I am a psychologist. I generally am a half-decent listener, so I started working with Stephen Ministry, which some of you may know is a Christian caregiving ministry that's ecumenical. It's in a number of different churches, and I trained to be a Stephen leader, and I've been helping to run that at my church since then. Others I know have come back from immersions and from retreats and have started doing more service-oriented work. a friend of mine at Loyola who went to Nicaragua started a program where computers were sent to a women's center so that women would have something to work on and to learn computer skills as well. So I think the best summary for me is that Ignatian Colleagues programs helped transform me from someone who lives for myself to someone who tries to live for God and for others. And many of you may already be there, but Ignatian Colleagues was really what pushed me down the road considerably. And so one more thing I'd like to say is that magis is another very important term in Ignatian spirituality. And as was recently described to me by a young Jesuit at Loyola, Father Steve Spahn, there's a lot of ways to think about the magis. Picking the better, going for the more, doing more. But the way he described it, I think really captured what's happened to me since I've been in Ignatian Colleagues, which is not doing more or better, but doing for something greater than yourself. And in my case, that is God, but I want to be really clear that you do not have to be a religious person to be in Ignatian Colleagues. One of my best buddies in Ignatian Colleagues is very famous for saying that she's a tried and true feminist atheist, yet she is not living for herself. She's not. And she was affected by her time in Ignatian Colleagues. Another friend of mine was a Buddhist, and it just deepened his Buddhist spirituality. God meets you where you are. And so if you're not religious, that's okay. So no matter where you're from, I've been working at Loyola, and I feel responsible for the mission at Loyola, and I think over time you'll feel responsible for the mission at your institution. And so the last thing I'd like to say is that a final lesson that I have learned from St. Ignatius and from Ignatian Colleagues is gratitude. When you pay attention and you focus on God, the natural endpoint is thankfulness. I'm thankful for God's creation. This is a beautiful place to be aware of that. I'm very thankful for Jesuit institutions, my own, but all of them. I'm thankful for people like Joe, Stephanie, Father Lucy, Father John, all other people who help put on the Ignatian Colleagues program. But most of all this evening, I'm grateful for each one of you. You have each chosen to take 18 months out of your busy life and focus on all things Ignatian. You've chosen to study, to travel, to be away from your family. I think that you will find it to be an amazing investment. And I hope that you will be as transformed as I have been and as my Ignatian colleagues have. Thank you very much. I will take some questions now.